The sky had no color left in it, just a dull canvas of bone-white clouds stretched thin across a horizon that never promised much. The prairie lay still, hushed like it was holding its breath, the kind of silence only the forgotten corners of the West knew how to keep. The wind had worn itself out days ago, and even the crows had stopped calling. Somewhere beyond the withered wheat and tired fences sat a house more skeleton than shelter, its porch sagging like a tired sigh, its bones groaning under the weight of time and weather. 3 children sat on that porch in a row, legs dangling, eyes blank. They didn't speak. They rarely did any more. Words cost too much these days, and they had little left to spend. The eldest, maybe 16 if you squinted past the sun-hardened skin and hollow cheeks, sat straight back. A girl made of splinters and silence. Her dress was patched with threadbare pieces of her mother's apron, her boots worn through at the soles. Her name, if she had one, had been forgotten by most, replaced with whispers. The girl, that one, the orphan with the little ones. Folks never used a name if they didn't plan to remember someone. She kept one eye on the fields, the other on her siblings. The boy, no more than 9, had scabbed knees and a nervous habit of tugging his sleeve. The youngest, a girl just 5, clung to a broken corn-husk doll as if it still held warmth. The 3 of them looked like wind-blown leaves stuck against the side of a dying tree, not yet fallen but far from safe. Their mother had passed in the spring, quietly, almost politely, like she didn't want to inconvenience anyone. Pneumonia, the doctor said. A cough that turned into silence. Their father left sometime in late summer, saddle-packed with the last of their good rope and a promise that rang as empty as the dried-up well. Said he was heading west, chasing silver, maybe redemption. Maybe just running. Either way, he never looked back. No letter. No trail. Just dust where his horse had been. At first, neighbors came. They brought cornbread and apples, hands full of pity. But pity curdles fast when there's no end in sight. After a while, folks stopped visiting. Some said the girl was proud, refused help. Others said she was stubborn, raising those kids alone. Truth was, no one offered anything worth keeping. She worked the garden until the dirt bit her fingers raw. She bartered eggs and old quilts for flour. She kept the fire low, the children warm, and her grief somewhere deep beneath her ribs, where no one could see it. Every morning she braided the little one's hair, and told her stories about a future that didn't exist yet. Every night she walked the perimeter of the land, as if daring the world to come take what little was left. The town, if you could call it that, sat 5 miles east. A crooked church, a dry goods store, a saloon too loud for the size of it. That was where the girl went once a week, trade basket on her hip, boots too big for her feet. She never spoke unless she had to. Some men looked at her like she was ripe. Others looked like they couldn't see her at all. One of them, a deputy with clean teeth and a cruel mouth, offered to take the boy off her hands. Too much burden for a little lady, he said. A fine family in Dakota needs a lad. He'd have a roof, real meals, maybe even school. She looked him in the eye, a calm, slow look that held no violence, just a kind of stillness that scared even more. She said nothing, but the answer hung in the air like thunder that never quite cracked. He didn't ask again. It wasn't that she was strong. Not in the way the West liked to paint its women, no firebrand, no sharp tongue. But she had a spine like tempered iron. Quiet strength. The kind that doesn't brag, just endures. She had no dreams left, not really. Not of marriage, or letters bearing good news, or a warm hand at her back. Those belonged to another girl, one who used to dance barefoot in the creek with wildflowers in her braid. That girl had faded when the baby cried, and there was no one left to hush her. Sometimes, when the moon rose fat and low, she'd sit on the porch with her arms around the younger 2. They'd fall asleep first, and she'd hum a lullaby she barely remembered. Her voice was rough, unused, but gentle. It was in those moments she allowed herself a flicker of feeling. Not hope, never that, but something quieter. A wish, maybe. For rest. For someone else to carry the weight, even just for a little while. But no one came. And she never asked. One evening, just as the sun broke itself against the edge of the world, and spilled gold across the broken fence line, a figure appeared at the far edge of the field. A man on horseback. Not fast. Not loud. Just there, like a shadow that had taken shape. She didn't rise. Just watched, one hand resting lightly on her brother's head. The man dismounted at the gate, looked it over, then back at the field beyond. His movements were measured, like someone who fixed things often and didn't rush. She knew that kind of man, the ones who said little, but looked like they saw everything. He didn't approach the house. Just walked the fence, testing the line, checking where it had snapped near the creek. After a while, he rode off, leaving nothing but hoofprints and questions behind. She thought nothing of it. Land was shared, fences mended by whoever had the tools. She didn't expect to see him again. But the next morning, a neat stack of firewood sat beside the porch. Clean cuts, fresh pine. No note. No knock. Just quiet generosity. She looked at it a long time, then carried each piece inside, one by one. That evening, she found a jar of honey left by the fence post. The lid was warm from the sun, wrapped in a red cloth that smelled faintly of cedar. She said nothing to the children, but that night she sang the lullaby all the way through, without forgetting a single word. The wind returned 2 days later. Nothing fierce, just enough to stir the wheat and push a cloud across the face of the moon. The girl stood barefoot in the doorway, arms folded, eyes scanning the horizon. The porch creaked beneath her, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself wonder, quietly, cautiously, if something might be shifting. Not fate, not fortune, but perhaps a thread had been picked up, somewhere far away, and was slowly being woven toward them. Not everything dead stayed buried. Not every silence stayed empty. And maybe, just maybe, the world had not yet finished writing her name. The first time she saw him again, he was walking the fence line with a post maul balanced over one shoulder and the reins of his horse slack in the other hand. No urgency in his step, no sound but the creak of worn leather and the soft groan of the earth beneath his boots. He was built like the land, broad, weathered, silent. The kind of man who said little and meant every word when he did. The kind of man folks didn't notice until they needed something built right and built once. She watched him from the porch, hands still damp from rinsing turnips, her brother and sister asleep inside with their mouths open in the midday heat. He didn't look her way, just studied the broken rail with the sort of steady patience she'd only ever seen in those who'd been alone a long time. He worked slow but sure, pulling up the shattered plank and measuring its length with practiced ease. He didn't ask whose land it was, didn't knock or wave, just fixed what needed fixing and left the world better than he found it. That evening, she found the gap sealed. Fresh nails. Tight join. Her breath caught, not in awe but confusion. Kindness that quiet was harder to understand than cruelty. The next day, he returned. Again with no words, just tools and that heavy, deliberate walk. She let the curtain fall gently as he moved across the edge of the property. Her brother followed at a distance, curious but cautious. He said the man's boots left deep prints, like he was sinking into the earth with every step. He became a rhythm. Twice a week, sometimes 3. Repairing fence. Clearing bramble. Once he patched a bit of roof with pine shingles cut too precise to be casual. She never invited him to stay. Never thanked him aloud. Still, she left a pail of cool well water near the tree line when the sun was hottest, and it was always empty by the time she looked again. One afternoon, when the summer had ripened to the edge of dust, she found him sitting on his heels near the shed, running his hand along the spine of a collapsed gate hinge. His horse stood nearby, reins looped over a fence post. She stepped down the porch quietly, wiping flour from her wrists, her voice low. "That gate don't swing right even when it tries," she said. He glanced up, slowly, not startled. He had pale eyes, the kind that looked faded by time, not color. His jaw was thick with stubble, his hands rough as bark. He didn't smile. But his gaze didn't slip past her, either. It held steady, respectful, like she was someone worth listening to. "I've seen worse," he replied after a beat. His voice was deep, dry, almost gravel. Not cold. Just used to being alone. She nodded once. Didn't offer tea. Didn't ask questions. Instead, she turned back to the porch, but left the door open behind her. When she returned, the gate swung smooth on a new hinge. And he was gone. The children asked about him in soft whispers. The little one said he moved like the mule deer they once saw by the creek. Quiet, strong, hard to catch. The boy wanted to know if he was a cowboy. She said no. Cowboys came with noise and trail dust and the smell of whiskey. This man smelled like cedar and iron, and he never came with anything but work. When Sunday came, he was in town. She saw him near the livery, talking low with the blacksmith. No hat, just sun in his hair and sleeves rolled up past the elbow. His shoulders looked heavier under daylight. Town folks nodded, gave him space, didn't chatter like they did about others. She figured he was the kind of man folks trusted with tools but not with stories. That same Sunday, she heard the whispers again. "You seen that girl? The one with the orphans and no name. She's been getting friendly with Cartwright, letting him fix up her place. Wouldn't be surprised if she's looking for a husband now. Probably tired of playing mother." The words pricked her like needles through thin cloth. She didn't turn. Just tightened her grip on the sack of cornmeal and walked out the store with her back straight and her jaw locked. Shame tried to creep in, but she was too tired to entertain it. That night, she boiled potatoes and fed the children, then stepped onto the porch as the sky turned the color of bruised peaches. He was there again, fixing a loose shutter this time. She watched his hands move slow and sure, not bothering with gloves, letting the splinters settle beneath his skin. "You always work this late?" she asked, her voice low, unsure if she even wanted an answer. He stood, wiped his palms on his jeans, then looked out across the field like it was answering for him. "Only where it's needed." They stood in silence a long time, the kind that didn't feel empty. Finally, she gestured toward the pail of well water beside the steps. "It's clean." He nodded once, took a drink, then handed it back without a word. She watched the way he moved. Careful, like a man who didn't want to startle anything, even time. "Folks talk," she said, eyes still on the sky. "They don't know how to leave quiet things alone." He looked at her, not blinking. "Let 'em talk," he said. "Wind don't care who hears it." A strange warmth unfolded in her chest, slow and unfamiliar. Not quite comfort, not quite hope, but something adjacent. He wasn't offering protection, just presence, and that, she realized, might be more rare. She didn't know much about him. Only that he came from the western ridge, kept mostly to himself, had a mule with a limp and a barn that leaned to the left. Folks called him Cartwright. She didn't know if that was a first name or a last. But it fit him. Solid, measured, carved into something that didn't break easy. Over the weeks, his gestures became a kind of language between them. A tin of beans left by the shed. A coil of rope replaced on her gate. Once, after a thunderstorm knocked the garden fence flat, she found it rebuilt by morning. She never saw him do it, but she knew. She never asked why he kept coming. And he never offered. There was no courtship, no flowers, just the quiet rhythm of work and watching. It was more than enough. The children trusted him first. Her brother started riding the fence behind him, mimicking his gait. Her sister drew him a picture on a scrap of sackcloth, a stick figure with a big hat and boot. She left it by the fence. He never mentioned it, but she found it weeks later, folded neat in the saddlebag of his horse when she walked by. Then one evening, after the sun had given up and left only a smear of lavender in its place, he knocked. Not loud. Just once. She opened the door, unsure why her hands were trembling. "Storm's coming," he said. "Roof leak." She nodded. "I know. I'll come early. Patch it before it breaks worse." And then, something shifted. A flicker in his expression. Not hesitation, but something like asking without asking. She studied him. The lines around his mouth. The way he held still when the wind touched her hair. "You don't owe us anything," she said softly. His voice was quieter than before. Almost a whisper. "Maybe not. But some things are worth showing up for. Even if nobody asks." He turned before she could answer. Walked off into the dark like he belonged to it. She stood on the porch a while longer, the air heavy with rain and something else she couldn't name. Something with weight. Something that might stay. And for the first time since her mother died, she did not feel alone. The frost came early that year, curling around window panes before the trees had fully surrendered their leave. It crept in through cracks she hadn't noticed before, stiffening blankets and icing breath. The hens stopped laying. The ground turned to stone. Her hands, raw from chopping wood and boiling water for laundry, stung even beneath the glove. And then, as if winter wasn't enough, her little brother fell ill. It started as a sniffle, then a cough, then the kind of silence that meant his breath had gone shallow, and something inside his chest rattled when he lay down. She tried everything her mother once whispered. Onion tea, firewood boiled dry to keep the air warm, a poultice wrapped tight across his ribs. But his cheeks grew redder, not from life but from fever. His little sister, still too young to understand death but old enough to fear the quiet, wouldn't leave his side. She stood by the edge of their small, cold room and realized she'd run out of time. That morning, she tied her hair back tight, left her siblings wrapped in quilts, and walked the 5 miles to town with coins stitched into the hem of her apron. Her boots slipped on the frozen path. Her fingertips turned gray. But her spine stayed straight. When she reached the doctor's door, she knocked with quiet urgency. He opened it part way, looked her up and down like she was a question he didn't feel like answering. "Fever," she said. "My brother's lungs sound wet. I need medicine. Something for his breathing." He shook his head before she'd finished. Said he couldn't hand out medicine to just anyone. Said he'd need money up front. Said he didn't want to be responsible if the boy died anyway. Her fingers found the coin in her hem. 4 pieces. Not enough. "I'll trade," she whispered. "I'll clean your house. Chop wood. I'll scrub your wife's floors. Anything." But he only stepped back, muttered something about charity being dry this month, and closed the door. She stood there a moment, breath fogging the glass, heart thudding, not with anger but with that old, quiet despair. The kind that made the world tilt just slightly beneath your feet. She walked back slower, each mile colder than the last. When she reached the house, the sun was gone, and her brother's fever had bloomed high. She curled herself around him that night, listening to his breathing stutter and catch, like an engine choking on memory. In the morning, there was a box on the porch. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a bottle of tonic, a jar of eucalyptus balm, and a folded note she never read. She didn't need to. Her breath hitched. Not from surprise, but something deeper, an ache too full to name. She warmed the bottle by the stove, gave him 2 spoonfuls, and sang the lullaby their mother once hummed. His breathing eased by nightfall. The next day, she walked to the ranch. It was far beyond the ridge, where fences stretched straight like drawn arrows, and the house sat square and honest beneath the wide sky. She hadn't been there before, but she knew where it was. Everyone in town did. Cartwright's place. Quiet. Self-sufficient. A man with no need for company and less for gossip. When she reached the gate, she didn't call out. Just waited. He came out eventually, wiping his hands on a rag. She couldn't tell if he'd been working leather or fixing something in the barn, but his hands were stained and steady. "I didn't ask you for help," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I know. But you helped." Another nod. "I did." She let the silence sit between them like snow settling on grass. She didn't want to thank him, because the words weren't big enough, and because something in her still bristled at the idea of being saved. I'm not good at owing people, she said. His mouth twitched, not a smile, exactly. More like agreement. I don't loan favors, he said. I offer them. Makes it cleaner. That stunned her for a second. The simplicity of it. The mercy tucked into a single sentence. I want to work, she said. Earn something. Not just medicine. He studied her face, like a man reading scripture carved into wood. Then he pointed toward the small cottage beside his barn. The roof was intact, the windows dusty, but the bones looked good. Used to be for a foreman, he said. Empty now. Needs cleaning. Stove works. Door locks. You and your siblings could use it, if you're willing. She blinked. You want us to live here? I want the cottage to have use again. You want a roof. Looks like we've both got something worth trading. Again, no pressure. No desperation. Just the quiet offer of stability. She spent the next week scrubbing every inch of the small place, on hands and knees, with soap she made from boiled lye and pine needles. The children helped. Her brother's fever faded slow but true. Her sister danced barefoot on the warm wood floors, calling it their new nest. And for the first time, the girl found herself waking to more than duty. She woke to birdsong outside the window, to fresh milk at the doorstep, to warmth not paid for in shame or fear. Cartwright gave them space, never lingered, but each day he left small things, a sack of oats, a hammer to fix a loose floorboard, matches for the stove. She started leaving things back. Bread wrapped in cloth, a stitched hand towel, no words, just the slow blooming of trust, like snowdrops pushing through hard frost. One evening, she opened the pantry in the little cottage and saw 3 words carved lightly into the shelf. Miss M. Callahan, neat lettering. Faint but certain. She stared at it for a long time. She'd never been given a full name before. Not one that fit. Not one someone had spoken with respect. Callahan. She didn't know where he'd picked it from. Maybe he made it up. Maybe it was stitched into the fabric of how he saw her, not as the girl, not as a burden, but as someone whole. Someone standing. Later that night, she asked him about it. Why that name? She said, leaning against the post of his barn, the lantern throwing gold across her face. He didn't look up from the bridle he was oiling. Seemed like you deserved one, he said. Something you could carry without apology. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses and the scars. And for once, they felt like proof instead of punishment. I didn't ask for that, she murmured. No, he said gently. But you earned it. The next morning, she wrote the name herself across a small tag and pinned it to the wall near the door. Callahan. Just that. No fuss. But her shoulders felt different after. The townsfolk noticed the change. Some turned their heads. Others nodded. The preacher's wife brought a pie. The blacksmith offered to teach her brother how to shoe a horse. Small things, but things all the same. She still kept her distance from most. But in the quiet corners of her heart, something softened. Something bloomed. She had not fallen in love. Not yet. But she had stepped into a room that someone had made for her, one with walls and warmth, and her name carved steady into the wood. And that, for now, was enough. The sky that Sunday morning wore its clearest blue in weeks, like even the heavens had decided to soften for a while. Light poured over the fields, turning frost into lace across the fence rails, catching on the edges of the grass where the earth hadn't yet thawed. The girl, now Miss Callahan in both name and presence, stood before the little mirror above the washbasin, tying a ribbon into her hair. It was red. A quiet red, faded from sun and time, salvaged from one of her mother's old dresses. She hadn't worn color in years. Brown and gray had been her safety, her shield. But today she chose red. Not because she wanted to be seen, but because she no longer feared it. In the other room, her brother buttoned the stiff collar of a borrowed shirt. He frowned at it, tongue pressed between his teeth. The younger girl twirled in a second-hand skirt that flared when she spun, barefoot for now, her boots beside the door freshly polished. The house smelled of soap and coal smoke, and something else beneath it, something lighter. A sense of becoming. Cartwright arrived just after breakfast, his horse neatly brushed, his own collar clean though slightly askew. He didn't knock. He never did. But when he stepped close, his eyes paused on the red ribbon. Just briefly. Long enough to say what words would only bruise. They rode to town in his wagon, all four of them, the children pressed close against the sideboards, her hand resting over theirs. The road was silent, except for the soft jostle of wheels over dirt and the whistle of wind through bare cottonwood. He didn't speak, nor did she. But the silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like reverence. When they reached the church, heads turned. People noticed. Not because she was loud, not because he made a show, but because two quiet souls don't often walk into a building together with so much gravity between them. Cartwright offered his arm. She hesitated, then took it. The whispers came quick and low. "That girl's bold, isn't she? Walking in like she owns the place. Did you hear he's letting her live on his land? She's no better than a squatter, ribbon or no." But there were other faces too. The preacher's wife smiled gently. A schoolteacher tipped his hat. The storekeeper, who once turned his back when she brought eggs to trade, moved over to make room on the pew. She sat tall, hands folded. The children fidgeted, but respectfully. Cartwright stayed quiet beside her, his shoulders still, boots planted wide like he was holding her place in the world with his body. Not as a wall, as a foundation. The sermon was short. Something about names and forgiveness, the kind of message that might have felt distant once, but today echoed louder than the preacher's voice. She didn't weep, but something inside her, something long curled into itself, unfolded a little, stretching toward the light. After service, townsfolk lingered outside. Cartwright stepped away to check the wagon hitch, leaving her briefly alone. A man approached. He wore a deputy's badge and a smirk. The same one who once offered to take the boy off her hands. "Well, if it ain't Miss Callahan," he drawled. "Didn't know that name came with land and a man." She didn't blink. Didn't know the law allowed cowards to wear tin. He laughed, but there was no mirth in it. "Careful, girl. That rancher's not your blood. You ain't owed anything. Folks might be watching now, but they'll forget you again just as quick." She tilted her head. "Let them." He looked at her like he wanted to spit, then turned and walked off into the crowd. Cartwright returned not a minute later. He didn't ask what had been said. Maybe he didn't need to. He just looked at her face, then handed her up into the wagon without a word. The ride home was different. Quieter. Not strained, just heavy with thoughts neither of them yet knew how to speak. That evening, the children played in the field behind the house, chasing the last of the light. She stood at the fence, watching their joy rise and fall like bird wings, and felt a pang of something sharp. Not sorrow. Not quite. Cartwright approached with his usual deliberate step. He stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "They like it here," he said. She nodded. "They feel safe." "You?" The question hung between them like smoke. She answered without looking. "I'm trying to." They watched the children for a long time. Then he said, softly, "If you ever wanted to stay longer, if it helped, you could call the place yours too." She turned. "Why?" His jaw shifted. "Because you've been building a home with every step you take. I just offered wood and nails." Her breath caught. "I'm not your wife, Mr. Cartwright." "I know," he said. "But you're not just someone passing through, either." She looked away, wind tugging at the ribbon in her hair. "You don't know what people say. What they'll keep saying." "I know," he said. "Let them." And that was it. No confession. No vow. Just the truth, shared without pressure. The kind of truth you could build something on. 2 nights later, a letter arrived. Not for her, but about her. From a lawyer in Junction. The man who once tried to separate the children had filed a claim for custody. Legal guardianship. He claimed she was unstable, unfit. He'd married since, had land now. Claimed he could give them better. The sheriff came by with the paper. Said she had 2 weeks to prepare. A hearing would be held in town. She nodded. Took the document. Closed the door behind him and stood there, staring at the walls she'd scrubbed, the floor she'd swept, the quilt she'd stitched from scrap. She could feel her heart roaring in her throat, but she did not cry. That night, she sat at the table with her siblings and told them the truth. They might try to take you, but I won't let them. The boy stared at her like she'd just threatened the sky. Promise. I do. After they slept, she stepped outside. Cartwright was there, fixing the barn latch. She walked straight to him, the paper crushed in her hand. He read it once, folded it once, then looked at her. I'll be there, he said. She exhaled, long and shaky. I don't want pity. You won't get any, he said. Only help. If you'll take it. She looked up at him, and for the first time in her life, let someone carry half her weight. For the first time, she didn't have to stand alone. And for the first time, she believed the fight might end in her favor. The courthouse sat like an old wound at the edge of town, low stone walls, tired windows, a roof patched with years. The building had seen trials that shaped the land, hung verdicts like frost on morning fields, and now it waited again. Quietly. For her. The morning of the hearing broke silver and soft, a fine mist hanging over the road as if the world itself had paused to listen. She wore the same red ribbon. Not for beauty. Not for defiance. Just as a reminder, to herself, to the world, that some things, once chosen, don't have to be loud to be powerful. Her siblings walked beside her, hands tucked into hers. Cartwright drove the wagon. His usual silence had a purpose this time. No comfort, no promise, just presence. He didn't try to soften the road. He just made sure she didn't walk it alone. Inside, the room was spare. A clerk at the desk. A judge with lines around his mouth like he'd forgotten how to smile. The deputy, deputy, stood near the front in a pressed vest, his new wife beside him, all pearls and starch and soft threats. He smirked as she entered, the corners of his mouth pulling in a way that turned even victory into mockery. She held the children closer. The judge began with formalities, names, date. The deputy's claim was read aloud, how she had no formal title to the land, no blood right to the children, no legal standing. How the man had married, found stability, and wanted to offer the children a structured life, away from the wildness of frontier survival. The words clanged like iron pots in a sacred place. Cold. Clinical. Her chance to speak came last. She stood, slow and steady. Her hands didn't tremble. I don't have paper, she said. I don't have blood right, or a name that means something in town. Her voice was low, but it filled the room. I was raised by a woman who died quietly. I was left by a man who rode away when it got hard. I raised these children with scraped knees and old quilts and cold water boiled hot. I didn't choose it. But I didn't run. The room was still. I didn't ask for help because I didn't expect it. But when help came, I earned it. Brick by brick, breath by breath. We didn't survive because of charity. We survived because I refused to let them go. She looked to her brother, then her sister. Their eyes were wide, wet, but unafraid. They know where they belong. And it isn't with someone who offered them up like cattle 2 winters ago. The deputy shifted, lips twitching. She's not married, he said aloud, as if that settled it. She's squatting on someone else's land. She isn't fit. She's just pretending. Cartwright stepped forward. He didn't speak to the deputy. He spoke to the judge. My land is mine, he said, voice like dry thunder. And I put her name on the deed last week. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. The judge took it, opened it, read it. Her breath caught. She hadn't known. I gave her half, Cartwright continued. Not because she needed it to be worthy, but because she already was. I just caught up to the truth. The room rippled with murmurs. The deputy's face flushed red. The judge cleared his throat. Looked again at the deed. Then at the children. Do they want to stay? He asked. The boy stood. She's my sister, he said. She's my mother. She's my everything. The little girl nodded, tight as a prayer. That's all I need, the judge said. This court denies the petition. The children remain under Miss Callahan's guardianship. The matter is closed. For a moment, the room was too quiet to hold the weight of what had been decided. Then the sound returned, scraping chairs, shuffled feet, breath let loose like wind through leaves. The deputy stormed out, his wife clicking behind him, her pearls rattling like glass. Cartwright turned to her. She didn't cry. Not yet. But she reached for his hand, and when he took it, their palms met like they'd been waiting years to fit. Later, they rode home slower than usual. The children dozed in the wagon, the girl's head on her brother's shoulder. The ribbon fluttered in her hair, bright even in fading light. At the ranch, she paused by the fence and looked back toward the hills. The land lay still, the grass brushed gold by twilight. Home. Inside, the cottage was warm. A stew bubbled. Bread cooled on the sill. A new name had been carved into the wooden beam above the hearth. This time not hidden, not shy. Callahan. Deep, straight, proud. She turned to him. Why didn't you tell me about the deed? He shrugged. Didn't want to distract you. She smiled, small but full. I don't know what I am now, she said. Wife? Mother? Just a girl who made it through. He stepped closer. Touched the back of her hand, gentle as spring rain. You're whatever you want to be, he said. You've earned all your names. They didn't kiss. Not yet. That would come in time. What mattered now was standing together in a room where every nail, every mark, had been placed with care. Where love wasn't loud, but sure. Later, long after the children were asleep, she opened the old ledger Cartwright kept by the mantel. Inside were pages of supplies, repairs, rainfall records. At the very back, names. Cartwright. Then, beneath it, in his clean, careful hand, Callahan. No first name. No need. It was hers. Fully. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt chosen. Not by accident. Not out of pity. But because someone had seen her, really seen her, and decided she was worth building a future around. And that future had her name carved right into it.